You're logged on to RJR 94 FM podcast.
It's time for us to throw open the doors to the guest room.
This morning we have inside the guest room Dr. Anthony Frampton, visiting research fellow from the Center for Tourism and Policy Research. Morning, sir. Welcome. How you doing?
Good. Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, this says visiting research fellow. Where are you visiting from?
Yeah, actually, I reside in the United States, in Sayreville, New Jersey. But I'm actually from the island of Dominica, which is further down south in the Eastern Caribbean.
Okay. And your area of expertise, tourism and policy research. Well, coming out of the Caribbean, so we can see the general interest. But what inspired you to make this your life's work?
Yeah, actually, my background is actually in the media.
It is?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm actually a former colleague of Gary Allen. So I attended the Caribbean Institute of Mass Communication, as it was called back then. So I had an early career as a radio and television broadcaster.
Why?
Good question. I think my dad was a broadcasting pioneer in the Eastern Caribbean, and
What's his name?
Ferdinand Frampton. He actually, that's during the time when we didn't have any cable television, and we had most of our broadcasting was terrestrial broadcasting. So during the times of Radio Antilles and these times, these were the type of people who were pioneering broadcasting from the post-colonial period.
So you grew up hearing Daddy on the radio?
Yes, actually, he was the one who started off speaking Creole, because Dominica is bilingual. We speak Creole and English. And during the colonial period, Creole was not allowed to be spoken on the radio. And it was my dad who really pioneered Creole broadcasting in the Eastern Caribbean.
That's pretty interesting. What does Creole sound like from Dominica? Tell us. How are you? Or I don't know. What?
Sakafet, normally say Bernard Frampton. Well, how are you? And my name is Bernard Frampton. It is a derivative of.
Is there French in there?
Yes, it's French-based, but it's also a mixture of African languages as well as English. So it's you'll find that there are different types of Creole. You have the Haitian Creole, but you also have the Creole of the Martinicans, the Guadeloupans, the St. Lucians, and the Dominicans. You also have Creole spoken in Mauritius.
We say we have Jamaican Creole too. So, which is why I said, let me hear yours.
Yes, it's not English-based at all. No.
Okay, so grew up. Daddy was on the radio speaking Creole. Is that something you identified that you liked hearing and you wanted to do? How did that move from his passion to yours?
Not really. It just so happened that at high school, I used to read a lot. I was a very prolific reader. Literary works. So I grew up on Lamin and Brathwaite, and I just loved the stories. I loved stories as a young boy. And so from that, I think the media houses recognized that I had a penchant for telling stories.
How were they?
I was involved in short story competitions, and then I entered theater. So
you were a young star.
Yes, the theater group called the People's Action Theater, which actually was started by Alwyn Bully, who happened to have been a famous, who eventually ended up in Jamaica and produced a lot of award-winning plays in Jamaica as well. But he started off this theater group that I joined as a young boy, and so that's how it all fused together.
You were brought to public attention, and the media decided they wanted you.
Well, I'm not so sure it was a mutual arrangement, but yes, I think being young, wanting to earn some money, and also just being in love with people and wanting to interact with people, I thought the media sort of a natural trajectory for me to start a career.
And how successful was that for you?
It was successful. I mean, we don't have to say during that time, the media wasn't paid very well. But so I mean, you had to
even now, generally.
So you had to make a decision of what you wanted. So there was, if you look at the whole level of community participation and popularity and so on, yes. But then after a while, I realized that if I wanted to have a family and develop a career, I needed to make some serious choices. And so I decided to go to school, because I didn't just want to be the popular guy on the radio that everybody was shouting on the streets and everybody was giving a free pass to go to a show. I realized at the end of the day, I was still having problems meeting my basic needs. So I wanted to move on and expand my options.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we studied at Carrimac.
Yes.
Which then opened your horizons.
Yes, actually, I part of all this public persona earned me a sort of scholarship from the Canadian Awards Training Project, and I came to Carrimac, where I wasn't so sure what I wanted to study, but then I met up with Franklin Sejus, sorry.
Chappie,
yeah. Mm-hmm. And he thought that I was a very rambunctious guy with a lot of talent. Mm-hmm. That's how he called me at the time. A Dominican guy, rambunctious, who had a knack for stories and images. And so I did the television production track. And from then on, I knew that filmmaking was going to become a part of my life.
And what films have you made?
I haven't done a lot of creative films, but I've done a number of documentary films. I mean, I did several films on tourism in Dominica. I did a major film called Découverte Dominique, which is a sort of a tourism expose of the island.
That's Discover Dominique?
Yes, Discover. Okay. Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm impressed. So, and then I did a few other films in terms of non-governmental work. I did a film on poverty alleviation and a few other films. The idea of getting into creative film production has always sort of been at the back of my mind, but I always seem to have gotten caught with trying to survive financially. So I had to always been doing cooperative work, or work for non-governmental organizations and so on. And so this major feature film has always eluded me.
But you have continued to study regardless of the demand. So we've got bachelor and master's degree from Ohio University in media criticism and media management, and recently your PhD in media and communication from a U.S. university. Tell us about that doctoral thesis now.
Yes, so actually you got it right. And when I realized that I didn't have the capital to produce films, I realized, well, if I wanted to stay into films, I probably could make a good contribution if I went in and studied it at a higher level, because that's one of the things that I was a little concerned about. When I was doing archival work, I always found that there was very little research on film production in the Caribbean. And so I decided to go back to school, and I actually did my dissertation work on the production of Pirates of the Caribbean, 2 films in the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, Dead Man's Chest and At World's End.
Now that sounds pretty interesting. I want you to tell me how that worked and what you found. But just to let anyone who is joining us now know, Dr. Anthony Frampton is in the guest room with us this morning, visiting research fellow from the Center for Tourism and Policy Research, and PhD on the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise.
Yes.
That was the subject of the dissertation.
Yes.
Or the focus.
Yes.
What did you find?
Okay, so a lot of the research on sort of what we call satellite productions or offshore productions, these are these major big budget film productions that come to foreign destinations or offshore destinations like the Caribbean or the Pacific Islands or Africa. These Hollywood films, these major big budget films, they go on to shoot in these locations. And the research that I found was on New Zealand and Australia, but there was no research that looked at what happened when these big budget films go to shoot in developing countries, particularly in small island developing states. Because I assumed that when these big budget films go, they would have a profound impact on the regulatory environment, the legislative environment, the economic, the culture, because you're going to have this massive sort of invasion of a sort of major Western project into a particular space.
For an extended time.
For extended period. And I was wondering, well, what happens then? So I think my research was the first research to look at it from a developing country perspective or host location perspective. I wanted to understand, instead of looking at it from the Hollywood perspective, so Hollywood goes there and they save money and they make this beautiful film with these beautiful seascapes and landscapes. I was wondering, yeah, but there are people there.
And what happens to us?
What happens? These are spaces. It wasn't just a vacuous space, that people live there. And so I studied the what happened when pirates, because pirates was huge for Dominica. And I looked at the legislation, the regulation, the transactional relationships, the policy framework, and I was astonished at basically how everything transpired.
Oh, come on. What did you find?
Well, I am in the process of publishing, but I will give you some insights. First of all, I found out that Pirates of the Caribbean only spent 5% of the budget for one of their productions. So for one, let's say Dead Man's Chest, they only spent 5% of that budget to shoot 2 of their films in Dominica.
Wow.
Now, if you look at it from the other side, I also found out that the government of Dominica provided them with an unprecedented range of incentives. They paid no taxes on the importation of almost anything. They were allowed to bring in their food for free. So they were allowed to bring in large amounts of containers of food. So what happened? The retail outlets did not sell anything to them as well, although you had some businesses saying, well, there was an increase in business activity. When I really looked further, the capacity for the country to earn revenue from these from retail transactions on food and other small purchases was actually shortchanged because of that importation. They also did not pay any income taxes. They did not pay, for the first time ever in the history, a company was not allowed to pay Social Security.
Wow.
So there were a whole range of things that the government of Dominica, and what I found out from interviewing, because I interviewed over 60 policy makers and administrators in Dominica, what I found out is a lot of them were unhappy about it. They broke some of the labor laws of the country in terms of child labor. The country specifically stipulates on what has to happen when children are employed in the country, and some of these sort of things were not followed. So there were a whole range of things that I found out that. To summarize, I found out that whenever these big budget companies go to these offshore locations, if these locations do not have the policy or institutional framework to accommodate these big budget productions, we find very unequal relationships where the host location invariably loses out big time.
We are looking forward to what you're publishing. We have to wrap up because the BBC World News comes up in 60 seconds. But this has been very interesting, and it resonates because our Jamaican filmmakers have had these cries echoing from different corners. This has been suspected, and in some places they have the evidence that similar things are happening here. So we definitely look forward to what your publishings will reveal. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you.
And we find you at the Center for Tourism and Policy Research at the UWI Mona.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony Frampton.